This story made millions of people cry. And almost all of them were crying over something that may never have happened. Let me show you how one scientific myth fooled the entire world. Somewhere in the Pacific Ocean, there is a whale that sings at a frequency no other whale uses. For over a decade, every single scientist who studied him said the same thing. He calls out every single year, and nothing answers him, not once. They called him the loneliest whale in the world. Millions of people fell in love with that story. Songs were written about him. Film was made about him with Leonardo DiCaprio as executive producer. And then, in the final days of a real expedition that spent years and hundreds of thousands of dollars trying to find him, the research team filmed something that quietly undid the entire legend. Stay with me, because the ending of this story is not the one you think you already know. In 1989, the United States Navy was running a network of underwater microphones across the Pacific Ocean. These weren't built to study marine life. They were built during the Cold War to detect Soviet submarines, hydrophones so sensitive they could pick up sound from thousands of miles away, sitting quietly on the ocean floor, listening for anything that moved. When the Cold War ended, the Navy did something unusual. They began declassifying parts of the network. And that's when a Navy technician named Joe George flagged something strange in the data. He reached out to a researcher named William Watkins, a leading expert in marine mammal bioacoustics at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. Watkins started going through the recordings, and he found a whale call, the kind of low-frequency sound that blue whales and fin whales use to communicate across entire ocean basins, except this one was wrong. Blue whales typically call somewhere between 10 and 39 Hertz. Fin whales usually pulse around 20 Hertz. This call was sitting at 52 Hertz, far outside the normal range for either species. To you and me, that might not sound like much, a difference in a number. But to a whale, frequency is identity. It's the difference between a voice another whale recognizes and a voice it simply doesn't register as belonging to its own kind. Imagine speaking in a register just slightly too high for anyone around you to understand you as one of their own. That's what this whale had apparently been doing since at least 1989, completely unnoticed. Watkins and his colleagues kept tracking the signal year after year, from 1992 until his death in 2004. The same signature kept appearing every season, always in isolation, never overlapping with the calls of any known bluefin or humpback whale in the area. In a paper published the same year Watkins died, the research team concluded that this animal appeared to be calling completely alone. One of his co-authors, Mary Ann Daher, was asked by reporters whether the whale might be lonely. Her answer was honest in a way most headlines that followed completely ignored. She said she didn't know if whales experience loneliness and that she didn't even want to touch the question. The media touched it anyway. In 2004, the New York Times ran a story about the whale, and the world gave him a name that stuck: the loneliest whale in the world. Now stay with me here, because I want you to understand something important before we go any further. At the time this story broke, no one had ever seen this whale, not once. Researchers knew him entirely through sound, a voice with no face, moving through some of the most remote water on the planet. Completely unaware that an entire species, ours, had been listening to him for over a decade and was about to fall in love with the idea of him. If this is the kind of story that gets under your skin, hit subscribe right now, because what happened next is going to completely change how you think about everything you just heard. So who is he? That's the question that consumed marine biologists for over a decade. The leading theory, the one most scientists leaned toward early on, is that he could be a hybrid. the offspring of a blue whale and a fin whale, two closely related species that occasionally do interbreed in the wild. Hybrid whales have been confirmed before through genetic testing on stranded animals, and a hybrid would explain a lot. It would explain a frequency sitting awkwardly between two species ranges. It would explain why his calls never lined up cleanly with either parent species' known vocal patterns. There was a second theory that researchers floated, less popular but persistent. Some scientists wondered if this whale could have a physical abnormality in his vocal anatomy, the structures whales use to generate these massive low-frequency calls. Meaning he might be a completely ordinary blue or fin whale who, for whatever reason, simply couldn't produce the correct call for his own species. Imagine being fluent in a language no one around you can quite parse, not because you're a different species, but because your voice came out just slightly off-pitch in a world where pitch is everything. Third theory got far less attention, but it stuck around in scientific circles for years. Some researchers wondered if this whale could represent a rare or critically diminished population, possibly a remnant of a distinct lineage reduced almost to nothing by 20th century commercial whaling, which devastated some whale populations by over 90% before international protections took effect in the 1980s. Under this theory, the unusual frequency wasn't a malformation or a hybrid trait at all. It was simply what was left of a calling pattern that used to belong to more than one whale, before there was almost no one left who could recognize it. What made this whale's case different from typical individual oddities was the consistency. Watkins and his team tracked the same acoustic signature every single season for over a decade, always appearing in the North Pacific between August and February. Always moving roughly the same general route. Year after year, the way a returning migration pattern usually looks. Recorded distances traveled per season ranged from a low of just over 400 miles up to a staggering high of nearly 7,000 miles in one recorded year. That is not the behavior of a creature wandering aimlessly. That is the behavior of an animal with somewhere specific to be, on a schedule it understood perfectly well, even if no other whales seemed to be following the exact same calendar. For years, that uncertainty was the entire story. No visual confirmation, no tracking tag. Just decades of acoustic recordings from a hydrophone network that could prove he existed, but nothing else. And that uncertainty is exactly what pulled a documentary filmmaker named Joshua Zeman into this story, the director behind Cropsey and the Sons of Sam. Zeman became obsessed with the idea of finally finding this whale, putting a face to a voice the world had been listening to for over 25 years. What's striking looking back at this period is just how much weight an entire cultural phenomenon was resting on a single academic paper and a handful of follow-up articles. Marine biologists who actually worked on the case were notably cautious in interviews from this period, repeatedly declining to confirm details the public had already decided were fact. Was the whale successfully finding mates? Was it reproducing? Researchers admitted plainly they had no idea. The species identification itself remained technically unconfirmed for over 2 decades, meaning that even calling it a whale of any specific kind, rather than simply an unidentified large baleen animal, was technically getting ahead of the actual data. None of that caution made it into the popular version of the story. The popular version needed an answer, even when the scientists studying it were comfortable admitting they didn't have one. Comment below right now and tell me what you think this whale actually is, hybrid, malformation, or something else entirely, because what the scientists eventually found is going to surprise almost everyone reading this. Zeman spent 4 years trying to get this expedition off the ground. The US Navy refused to participate or release additional classified acoustic files. So Zeman did something unconventional. He launched a Kickstarter campaign. It raised more than $400,000 from over 3,000 supporters, ordinary people from all over the world who had read the original story and never forgotten it. With that funding, and backing from executive producers Leonardo DiCaprio and Adrian Grenier, Zeman assembled a team of some of the best whale researchers in the world, including the Cascadia Research Collective. And in 2015, they set out into the Pacific on a small research vessel. They had one advantage no one had ever had before: decades of acoustic data narrowing down a general migration pattern through the North Pacific, somewhere between the Aleutian Islands and the California coast. With the whale typically detected between August and February before moving out of hydrophone range entirely. They didn't know if he was still alive. They didn't know if 7 days at sea, the maximum their funding could support, would be anywhere close to enough time to find one whale in millions of square miles of open ocean. Researchers on the team openly compared it to searching for a needle in a haystack, except the haystack was an ocean, and they weren't even certain the needles still existed. For most of the expedition, nothing happened. Days passed with empty water and silent hydrophones. And then, off the coast of Southern California, in a stretch of water nobody expected, their equipment picked up something, a call. Not a perfect match to the original signature Watkins had recorded decades earlier, but close, unmistakably close, in a location that lined up with everything the historical data suggested. For a moment, after 26 years of mystery, it seemed like they might actually be about to see him. They didn't find him on that trip. The 7-day window ran out before the team could close the distance between the sound and its source, and the expedition that was supposed to be the start of a larger, fully funded search never happened. The bigger voyage Zeman had originally planned fell apart, mostly over the cost of securing a research vessel capable of the kind of extended search the mystery actually required. For a film built entirely around finding an answer, it looked for a while like it was going to end in exactly the same uncertainty that started it. But here's the part of this story that almost never gets told, the part that happened quietly, a year after the main expedition wrapped, during a completely separate research survey that wasn't even built to look for this whale specifically. During that follow-up survey, the Cascadia Research Collective was out tagging whales along the Southern California coast, standard fieldwork, nothing related to the search for 52 on paper. And while they were out there, they spotted something. A whale with subtle differences from a typical blue whale, a slightly larger dorsal fin, faint mottled pigmentation that didn't quite match either species. Researchers had documented an animal with this exact profile before, first recorded back in 1995, catalogued under the designation CRCBM 3330. A confirmed blue and fin whale hybrid, one of the strongest candidates anyone had ever identified for the source of the 52 Hertz call. And here's where the story stops being what almost everyone online still believes it is. This hybrid whale, the one researchers consider the single most likely candidate for the voice the world had been calling the loneliest whale for over a decade, was not alone. He was filmed feeding among a group of 15 to 25 blue whales. At one point, he was observed closely paired with another blue whale, swimming alongside it the way social whales do. Researchers were careful, even with this discovery, not to overstate the certainty. A shared profile and a strong behavioral match are not the same as absolute genetic confirmation that this specific individual produced every recorded 52 Hertz call going back to 1989. Whale identification at sea, even with modern photo identification techniques, still involves a margin of uncertainty that pure DNA sequencing would close completely. And a full genetic sample from this particular animal has not been definitively published as conclusive proof. But among everyone who has studied this case for over 3 decades, this sighting remains the closest anyone has ever come to an actual answer, and it points in a direction nobody expected back in 2004. Let that sink in for a second, because almost nobody who shares this story online knows that part. The whale the entire internet decided was the most isolated creature on the planet. The symbol millions of people projected their own loneliness onto may have spent years quietly feeding, traveling, and socializing among other whales the entire time. Not unanswered, not isolated, possibly just speaking in a slightly different key, surrounded by company that never seemed to mind. There's something else almost nobody mentions when they tell this story. Something researchers picked up years before that follow-up survey. Back in 2010, sensors off the coast of California picked up calls with the same unusual frequency pattern. But the readings came from widely separated locations at the same time, which meant they almost certainly weren't coming from a single animal. Scientists at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography concluded that more than one whale might be calling at 52 Hertz somewhere out there in the Pacific, completely independent of each other. This detail matters more than it first appears, because it means the entire premise of the original 2004 paper was already starting to look incomplete just 6 years after publication. Researchers at the time were cautious about overstating the finding, noting correctly that widely separated hydrophones picking up similar but not identical signatures could indicate multiple animals, or related individuals, or even a wider population sharing comparable vocal traits passed down genetically rather than developed individually. None of that nuance made it into popular retellings, which by 2010 had already cemented the singular, solitary version of the story into something close to permanent cultural fact. So the premise the entire legend was built on, that there has only ever been one whale on Earth singing at this frequency, was already shaky years before Zeeman's expedition even set sail. There may never have been just one lonely voice calling into an empty ocean. There may have been several, separated not by isolation, but simply by the vast scale of the ocean itself, each one potentially surrounded by other whales the whole time. None of them aware that humans had built an entire mythology around the idea that they were alone. If your mind is doing what mine did the first time I learned this, drop a comment with the word frequency, because I want to know how many of you are sitting with this twist the same way I am right now. It's worth pointing out how rarely this correction actually makes it back into public conversation. Search this whale's name today, and most of what comes up still repeats the original 2004 framing almost word for word. The lone voice, the unanswered call, the loneliest creature on Earth, with little to no mention of the 2015 expedition or the follow-up footage that quietly complicated all of it. Fact-checking outlets have occasionally addressed viral claims that the whale found a friend, typically responding that there's no definitive new evidence either way, which is true in the narrowest technical sense, but somewhat misses just how much the broader picture has already shifted since the myth first took hold. So why did the myth survive, even after evidence started pointing the other way? Partly because the story was never really about marine biology in the first place. In 2004, when the original New York Times article broke, letters started arriving at Woods Hole, not from scientists, from ordinary strangers, writing in about a whale they would never see, asking if he was okay. Some of them writing about their own isolation, their own sense of being unheard, projected entirely onto an animal swimming somewhere in the Pacific Ocean. South Korea's BTS released a song called Whalean 52 in 2015, using the whale explicitly as a metaphor for adolescent alienation. English folk duo Catherine Roberts and Sean Lakeman wrote a song called 52 Hertz the same year, with lyrics about singing a love song that no one can hear. Artists across the world, writing in different languages on different continents, kept reaching for the same animal as a symbol for the exact same feeling. Because here's the part that gets missed in almost every retelling. We don't actually know if this whale or whales ever experienced anything close to loneliness. That word is a human concept, built around human emotional architecture, and we attached it to him because it's the framework we understand. The very researcher who first studied his calls told reporters directly that she didn't want to speculate on whether whales feel lonely at all. We took an animal we barely understood, whose internal experience we had no way to measure, and we built an entire emotional narrative on top of him because his frequency happened to be different from everyone else's. We needed him to be lonely because loneliness is something we understand intimately, something millions of people quietly carry around every single day, calling out in their own way, hoping someone, anyone, responds at the right frequency. The documentary came out in 2021 called The Loneliest Whale: The Search for 52. It ends with that quiet footage from the follow-up survey, the hybrid whale, swimming among other blue whales, paired up with one of them, captured almost as an afterthought to the main expedition. Critics and researchers who covered the story afterward called it a poignant reminder that the loneliness at the center of this whole legend might be more myth than fact. That doesn't make the story less interesting. If anything, it makes it more interesting, because it means the most famous lonely animal on the internet might never have been lonely at all. It means an entire generation of people built tattoos, novels, songs, and a feature film with Hollywood backing around a metaphor that the evidence was quietly contradicting the entire time. And it raises a much stranger question than the one we started with. If we can build a 20-year global mythology around a single creature based on an absence of evidence we now have reason to question how many other stories we believe completely are built on exactly the same kind of silence. Consider how few data points this entire legend actually rested on for most of its life. A handful of acoustic recordings, one published paper, a scattering of follow-up articles repeating the same core details for over 15 years before anyone mounted a serious attempt to verify them directly. That's an unusually thin foundation for a story that ended up shaping a documentary with major studio backing, multiple songs across different countries and languages, a published novel in Japan that was later adapted into a feature film of its own, and a steady stream of tattoos and artwork from people who had never even heard the actual recording. The myth didn't grow because the evidence was strong. It grew because the absence of evidence left exactly enough room for millions of people to fill it in with their own experience. There's also a part of this story that connects to something bigger than one whale's social life. During Zeeman's expedition, the team kept running into a different problem entirely, one that had nothing to do with whether this whale was alone. Ocean noise pollution from commercial shipping has increased dramatically since the 1950s. That constant background noise interferes with how whales communicate over long distances. The exact range these low-frequency calls depend on to travel across entire ocean basins. Scientists involved in the search noted that even if every whale in the Pacific was perfectly capable of recognizing every other whale's call, a louder, busier ocean makes those calls harder to hear clearly across distance. For every whale, not just one unusual one. The film itself struggled with exactly this tension while it was being made. Joshua Zeeman has talked openly in interviews about how difficult it was to pitch a documentary built around an uncertain outcome. Funders kept asking the same question: can you guarantee you'll find the whale? He couldn't, and that uncertainty very nearly killed the project before it started. What eventually got it made wasn't a guarantee of resolution. It was the willingness of more than 3,000 strangers to fund a search with no promised ending. Because the not knowing was, in its own way, exactly what had made the story worth telling for the previous 25 years. There's an irony in that worth sitting with. The thing that made this story so powerful, the uncertainty, the absence, the unanswered call, is the exact same thing that allowed the myth to outrun the evidence for so long. Once researchers started getting closer to an actual answer, once hybrid candidates and follow-up sightings entered the picture, the story got more scientifically accurate. And, for a lot of people who had attached deep personal meaning to the original myth, slightly less satisfying. A confirmed hybrid whale swimming contentedly among a pod of 20 other whales doesn't carry the same emotional weight as a single voice crying out into permanent silence. The truth, in this case, is quieter than the legend, and quieter stories don't spread nearly as fast online. That reframes the entire legend one more time. Maybe this was never really a story about one whale's biology at all. Maybe it was always a story about how hard it's becoming for any whale to be heard clearly across an ocean we've filled with engine noise, sonar, and shipping traffic. Year after year, regardless of what frequency they happen to sing in. As of now, researchers still aren't 100% certain that the hybrid whale filmed in that follow-up survey is definitively the exact source of every 52 Hertz call ever recorded since 1989. The Navy's network that first detected him is no longer actively monitoring for this specific signature. Newer similar calls, picked up by Scripps researchers, have come in at a slightly lower pitch, which scientists note lines up with a broader trend of blue whales gradually lowering their calls over recent decades. The full picture is still incomplete. But the core assumption that built this entire legend, that there has only ever been one whale, completely alone, calling into permanent silence, no longer holds up the way it did in 2004. It's also worth understanding what blue and fin whale hybrids actually represent biologically, because it puts the original mystery in better context. These two species diverged from a common ancestor millions of years ago, far enough apart that successful hybridization is considered rare, though not impossible. Confirmed cases have shown up in genetic testing on stranded animals in multiple ocean basins. A hybrid inherits traits unpredictably from both parent species, which can include vocal characteristics that don't cleanly match either parent's typical calling range. That's likely why this whale's frequency sat in an unusual zone, not quite blue, not quite fin, something acoustically in between. Produced by an animal that was never going to sound exactly like either side of its own ancestry. What nobody fully anticipated back in 1989 was how much cultural weight a single data point could eventually carry. A technician flags an unusual signal. A bioacoustics researcher spends over a decade quietly tracking it. A newspaper runs one story. And from that chain of fairly ordinary scientific process, an entire global mythology grows, outlives the original researcher, outlives several waves of internet culture, gets monetized into a feature documentary backed by a Hollywood producer, and ends up influencing songs released on opposite sides of the planet in Korean and in English. Written by artists who had likely never spoken to each other or read the same scientific papers, all converging on the same image independently. So here's where this actually leaves us. A whale, or possibly several whales, somewhere in the Pacific right now, still calling at a frequency that doesn't match the textbook range for any known species. We have a strong hybrid candidate. We have footage of that candidate swimming among other blue whales, paired with one of them. And we have 20 years of songs, books, documentaries, and strangers' letters built around the assumption that none of that was true. And maybe that's the most honest place to leave this. Not with a clean resolution, because the ocean rarely gives us one, but with a story that quietly corrected itself over 2 decades, while almost nobody was paying attention to the correction. The whale, everyone fell in love with as a symbol of permanent isolation, may have spent years surrounded by company, speaking in a voice that was different, not absent of an audience. Sometimes being unanswered and being unheard are not actually the same thing. And sometimes the most viral version of a story is the one that got frozen in time before anyone had the chance to finish the research. If this video kept you here until the very end, that tells me something, so do me a favor and subscribe right now. Because the ocean is full of stories exactly like this one. stories the public latched onto decades ago that the actual research quietly moved past while almost nobody noticed. Drop a comment below with the word frequency if this twist got you, because I want to know exactly how many of you walked in believing the version of this story everyone else still believes. And I will see you in the next one.